absolutely support and have supported forever ending the Cuban embargo. A lot of the Cuban migrants who come, one of the reasons we don't do that is there's tremendous political pressure on Florida politicians, on Florida Republicans from Cuban migrants who don't want to do that. Can you explain why that is?
Please,
the Cuban bourgeoisie that has been waging a class war, the same people who fled because Fidel Castro wanted to share the resources with the poor, they don't want to lift the Cuban embargo.
Go to Cuba with the poor sounds like a little bit of a euphemism.
No. Go to Cuba and ask the average Cuban how they feel about the Cuban embargo. So these class traders that moved to Florida, their opinion means nothing. Saying they didn't want to keep the Cuban embargo, does that sound like people who care about the country, Robbie? Or people that support U.S. hegemony and capitalist domination? Like I want the uplifting of the global working class, and you guys rather destroy the global working class just so you guys can say zingers like communism never worked, that Cuba is failing. Leave these countries alone and allow them to thrive, and then we can talk. Until then, you have to explain to me, Robbie, what's the excuse for the United States for the massive poverty, despite the fact that we have no country sanctioning us? Where's the U.S. embargo, Robbie? But we got Skid Row. We got people without health care. 60,000 Americans die each year because they don't have health care. 300,000 plus could have lived through the COVID pandemic if we had health care. So what's the excuse for the United States? Who's the giant power that has got their boot on our neck? Our ruling class has failed. The central planning model of the United States has failed. So to point the finger at other systems and while you live in the empire that people are starving in is the height of cowardice.
Welcome to another episode of You Left Shit Out. I'm your host, Compton J. I had to start a stream the right way with this clip because yesterday we attempted to do this and had, internet issues right when I hit play. So it wasn't so smooth. So I needed to have this clip get its just due with an opening of a stream and just fire. Just that one part, which happens to be like the last 40 seconds or maybe the last 2 minutes of the entire clip, of the entire the entire segment, I should say. It's the last 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes or so where he absolutely eats him up right there at the end that you see. So shout out to Nick for that clip. Today we're talking about class warfare. Today we're talking about the housing crisis. So I'll toss the banner back up just so people know what we're talking about here. So the housing crisis is a class war. And just, some of the data that's going to come out in this stream today, we'll learn that Black women are one of the categories that are at most risk for evictions, along with all people of color, poor and working class people. So all of those categories, but Black women in particular. And then we're going to kind of look at how capitalism has sort of framed the understanding of housing and really how this is a ransom because people need a place to stay and they're just jacking up rents. That's ransom. So we'll get into that. But it's important for people to understand these Fed rate hikes, these recessions. They tell you one thing on TV. This is really about suppressing wages. That's what this really is about, but they can't say that, so they have all of these other names. Now, some of these other sort of satellite issues may happen. That is true that they speak about, but please, the framing of inflation, the framing of recession, the framing of Fed hikes is completely from the perspective of the ruling class and not the worker. So that's very key to understanding when we're understanding class warfare. It's not violence in the strict sense of a bullet. It's violence in the sense of you having to live paycheck to paycheck, you having to move from place to place, you having unstable housing, or ultimately you becoming unhoused. This is all intentional. This is all intentional. So that's what we're gonna jump in today. But as always, we'll definitely, where was I here? We'll definitely get into a chat check, because we do have actually a lot more comments than we would normally have this early in the show. So I'm curious to see what everybody's talking about. But let me continue to open up this other screen so I can see what I'm talking about. All right, so let's look at some comments. Let's see what everybody's chatting about. Is this a topic that hits everybody? Is that what the chatter is about? And I'll start from the top. Let me see how far back I can go here. Good day. Happy Friday. Blessings to all the oppressed and those struggling with illness. Everyone should own the property they live in, and no one should be able to own more than one home. It is a class war. Privatization is theft of public assets. This must be reversed. Appropriate the rich. When is the interview with Jill and Kashama? That date hasn't been set, and it's Kashama that, like, Jill and Jill's camp and RBN, we're ready. Kashama has a bunch of stuff going on, so she's the one who has to say, kind of like, hey, give me some time to get a moment to breathe. She's doing a lot of work in the community right now, so that's why, because this is something I've been waiting on for at least a month. So at least a month we've been waiting for this. So, but it's getting closer, is what I've been told. When are you going to have Henry of Infrared on your show? He DM'd me. Never. I'm not interested. I just learned of this person, Infrared. This is the first time I'm hearing of him with this MAGA communism. So I'm completely not interested in that. I'll be doing a stream on it, but this MAGA communism, that's just simply a branding thing. It has nothing to do with communism. It's more of a name. So it's not the tenets, it's not the policies, it's not the concepts of communism. It is a name, just like it's like MAGA. It's a name, a slogan. It's meant to grasp attention. And I'm now coming to this conclusion after hours of video and reading tons of shit about this. The stream we did before when Jackson was on, and subsequent, I did another one, or maybe we both did another one subsequent. I still was unsure, because I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. So I want to I'm trying to hear you out. I want to hear this concept. Because it's the same thing as socialist or socialism patriotism, and it's the same people who are kind of putting forth these two ideas that are very intertwined. After just learning more about it, after just hearing other Marxist critiques of it, at least like 10, that this is pretty much bullshit, and just hearing some of the breakdowns of the explanations, it's just nonsense. It's nonsense, and it's not. You don't give nonsense air. I take this as the same thing as somebody telling me the sky is yellow. Like, would I bring somebody on my show to talk about the sky is yellow? Nah, I'm not. So that's my point of view. Sorry if it may offend some, but that happens. Some people's opinions offend sometimes, but that is my opinion. So deficit reduction is class warfare. That is absolutely correct. my landlord would extract sexual favors from female tenants who fell behind on rent, he should be jailed as a rapist, but still out getting rich off others' labor. And that's what we're going to examine. The entire use of a landlord. Like it's a completely unneeded, it's not an occupation. So we're gonna examine that also today. So great. All right. So let me look at a couple of items here. I see Alex. Something that's ringing true. I just saw a glimpse of a tweet. The revolution is not going to be left. A lot of people who call themselves left. Imagine if people who call themselves left. You know what? Maybe I should not say that. Yeah. So let's not do that. All right. So let's get started with the first clip. Now I want to start out with a clip from Democracy Now! And the reason I'm using this clip is because the KC Tenants Association was on there to talk about this very topic. And the KC Tenant I'm sorry, I said association. To be honest, I don't know if it's association. Don't quote me. It's the KC Tenant. Anyway, when we get to the video, they'll say it, and then I'll make sure to make a point to point that out. But let me share my other screen here. So while I'm doing this, let me explain why I was late. So I got up to go to one of our car's parking spots to go get something. I was going to take the car to go get something. There's a car on the street, and we have it's hard to find parking. So I was leaving that car and taking the car in the parking spot. So I go down there and the car's towed. So we're dealing with that and just got good news. So I had to push that back because I had to give them a piece of my, I had to. You don't want to be on the receiving end of Compton J's complaint. So imagine this, but whatever the other topic is. So just dealt with that. So that is now being resolved or has been resolved. So yeah. So here is did I switch it? Yeah, I did. So I got so many screens open. I tried something different. I'm like, let me be prepared and have everything just kind of already open. So let's see how this goes. All right. So again, this clip here is from Democracy Now! As rents soar and eviction spikes. They're talking about Biden. Now, this is talking about Biden have the same, will Biden address housing prices with the same urgency as gas prices? That's the question. And this is August 11th, but it ties into this topic that we're talking about. So let me make sure it looks good on the screen. Let's see here.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Housing advocates are calling on the Biden administration to address the soaring cost of rent with the same level of dedication he's shown to reducing gas prices. This comes as a new report shows evictions are spiking as rental protections disappear. A coalition of hundreds of tenant unions and housing activists call the situation a national emergency as rental costs rise at the fastest pace in 3 decades. This is Ani Thompson, an organizer with Faith in the Valley in Stockton, California, who's in Washington, D.C. this week as a tenant delegate with the Homes Guarantee Campaign. He spoke to Democracy Now! After meeting with Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Sandra Thompson.
I experienced my rent going from $1,500 to $1,700 in 1 year. And the thing is that with paying $1,500, that was already high, but to hike it up from $1,500 to $1,700, I felt like was ridiculous. when it comes to a 10% rent hike, like it actually, like I said, it does have a big difference, or it does mean a big difference for a lot of folks in California. Like in my own personal situation, that 10% rent hike meant a $200 difference in my rent, and that within it.
So let's pause it there. A $200 spike in their rent. Now let me see. That's about what our spike was, and you know, our situation, my family situation is, or at least was up in the summer. So, we're okay. Let's see, my wife is non-establishment, but she's more like Kim Iverson kind of establishment, non-establishment. Um, so she didn't want to pay that, of course, and she wanted to move and all this stuff. But come to find out, everywhere else was a lot more expensive. So our rent hike was about 10%. Yeah, it's about 10%. That's crazy. That and again, but I don't want to give off what's going to be said later on in the show, so I'll pause there. Let me get back to the video. I want to say too much and kind of give away what's coming up.
In itself meant that I was not able to, fix my car when it needed maintenance, due to having to forfeit that $200 every month to rent. And then it also meant, getting in a cycle of overdraft fees. Of overdrafting my account and inquiring fees and then paying it off when I got paid. But then because I paid that money to those fees, now I have to overdraft my account again so that I can cover my bills. And then I have to
So yeah, like comments like this, I put them up because I'm not afraid of it. It doesn't, like an unnamed person, like your opinion really doesn't do anything. It just washes over me. So that's an okay opinion to have. Glad you're here listening to the weaker by week place, making comments. Glad you're still participating. That is great to see. But yeah, let's continue.
the fees again, and then I have to pay it off when I get paid again. And then it's just this vicious cycle that starts up, and it almost seems like it has no end. I think that it's no brainer that rent prices are definitely tied to inflation, right? And that for them to not include it is kind of like disheartening. But that this issue,
now think about the point that he makes, and the KC Tenant president, I think that's what the representative is going to be called, the president that they're going to be showing in this same segment, is going to talk more about this. But let me replay this 1 second here. This last point that he makes,
like disheartening. But that this issue, this housing crisis issue, is not going to go anywhere, and that they cannot continue to ignore it and further or prolonging addressing it.
So what they're referring to here is the Inflation Act. Now, it wasn't passed at the time, and the question is why wouldn't the Inflation Act not address housing costs? Why wouldn't our own money address our own issues? Wouldn't that make sense? So this is what he's speaking to, and this is what one of the items that the KC Tenant president is going to bring up as one thing that the president can do. So let's where was I? Here it goes. Let's continue.
It's only going to make it worse for American citizens.
That's tenant delegate Zani Thompson, part of the Homes Guarantee campaign underway now in Washington, D.C. For now, we stay in D.C. to speak with Tara Raghavir, director of KC Tenants, a grassroots tenant-led organization based in Kansas.
KC Tenants. That's just, so it's no associate, just KC Tenants.
City. She's also the Homes Guarantee campaign director at People's Action. Tara, welcome back to Democracy Now! Explain why you're in D.C. and the...
Now, before she goes into why she's in DC and what she's doing there, she's kind of like lobbying to for housing to be put into the fake Inflation Reduction Act. But KC Tenants is in KC where Nick is. Nick, RBN member Nick, RBN co-founder Nick. And he is trying to reach out to them. He's been to several of their events. I'm not sure if he's recorded from there or reported from there, but I know he's been there. Actually, yeah, I think he did report from there. So this is the association or the organization, because they don't call themselves an association, but this is the organization that RBN Nick specifically is wanting to team up with and will be reaching out to in KC.
Level of pressure on people who are renting and rents increasing in a way we haven't seen in like 30 years.
Thank you so much for having me back, Amy. We're in DC because the rent is too damn high. You heard Zani speak to this, but people across the country are being squeezed at the gas pump, at the grocery store. But the biggest expense for most American households is their cost of their housing. It's their rent. And rents are up 6.3% in the latest inflation figures. This is the biggest increase in rents in 35 years. Median rent across the country is over $2,000 for the first time ever. And people simply can't afford it. This rent inflation crisis is really sparing no one and no place. So we're in DC with tenants like Zani, a delegation of tenants who have been impacted by these rent hikes, to push the president to do everything in his legal authority to regulate the rent now.
And can you explain about pandemic protections being rolled back and how that affects people?
So the eviction rates are back up to pre-pandemic levels, but really there's no rate of eviction that should be acceptable. We can't celebrate lower than normal rates, and we can't celebrate.
I'm gonna pause it here for those that want to look up her name. She does have a unique name to spell. Now I'll spell it for you. Her name is Tara. I believe that's how she pronounces it. I know same spellings, so people pronounce it Tara and Tara. So I think she said Tara, and it's R as in Rick, A as in Apple, G as in Gary, H as in Harry. I think that's a U. Yeah, U as in unique, V as in Victor, E as in Eric, E as in Eric, R as in Rick. I think that's what her name is. HU. Yeah. She's the home guarantee campaign. She's also with KC Tenants. So she's kind of doing double duty out there in KC. And yes, somebody said in the comments, is Nick in KC? Yes, Nick is in KC. So let's continue with the video.
Returning back to normal. What we believe is every eviction is an act of violence. And what the administration did during the pandemic to alleviate
every eviction is an act of violence. That's what I want the proletariat, the working class, to really more understand. Not to like internalize evictions. Oh, I did something wrong. That's an act of violence. Because your material, what's your number one need behind surviving, meaning like water and food? Isn't it a roof over your head? This is where it leads to where I was saying housing in the United States, it amounts to ransom. Just raising the price whenever they want. The landlord has not done anything. They're not a worker. And we're going to get to a second thought video later in the next video after the article I'm going to cover in just a little bit. But let's listen a little more to this interview here.
The risk of eviction or provide some relief to tenants was really a bailout to landlords. There was billions and billions of dollars of federal assistance put out in the form of rental assistance that put the burden on tenants to apply, but they didn't get to keep that check, right? They had to turn that check over to their landlord. The abomination in all of this is that none of that public money came with strings attached, right? None of that actually built in any structural shift of power from landlords to tenants. So today, not only do we see evictions returning back to pre-pandemic levels. We also see a different type of eviction crisis playing out outside of the courtrooms as people simply can't afford their rent. See, when a landlord increases the rent beyond a place where a tenant can afford it, they don't have the choice to just scrape together another $200 and try to make it work. Often that is tantamount to an eviction, and people.
Right. So the eviction rate is actually a lot higher than what is reported. Because how is it not an eviction if you raise the rent above what the current person residing in that unit can pay? So if you're paying $1,000 and then it's raised to $1,800, which the person living there can't pay, and they have to leave, that's an eviction that doesn't go on the books as an eviction. Yeah, unfortunately, Saul, that may not happen. That may not happen, and this was a response to that. So, man. So yeah, let's get through some more of this video. It's very, very important information in this video here.
And people are losing their homes because their rent is increasing or their lease is not getting renewed.
And in just a moment, we're going to speak with one of the leaders of the movement to help the unhoused in Los Angeles.
Now, before to get to their next guest, the first video I played ties into this. Because what did Nick say in the intro video? What he was saying on Rising? He's saying, what's the United States' fault for the economic state it's in? They don't have anybody sanctioning them. Like people, like countries like Cuba, countries like Venezuela, where they always want to say communism, look, it's failing as they place their boot on their neck. But what's happening here? The point that Nick makes. What's happening here in the United States? Skyrocketing rent, and they keep want to say wages are up. What's the use of wages going up? Whatever. I'm just going to pick a number. I don't know if this is it. Wages being up 5%, if inflation's at 8%. What does that do? How many people in the United States, how many households, I should say, in the United States is paying more than 50% of their income on housing, on rent? Is that sustainable? Do you think our government thinks that's sustainable? Or do you think they think the people that are paying them is doing this or making sure this happens this way so those people have to get second and third jobs? These low-paying jobs that keeps the profits where they are. Recessions are about suppressing wages or the effects of wages. So you can increase, we're at $15 an hour, but if you increase inflation, or if you increase the interest rate, for example, to a level to where it's above the increase of wages, that wipes away. And it's just for aesthetics to say $15 or whatever that amount has been raised to. It's just really purely aesthetics. So let's continue.
And the growing tension there. But if you can talk about, I mean, we know the rents that are going up in coastal cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles, here in New York City. You're from Kansas City. Talk about it all over.
In Kansas City, the rent is up 7.5%. City Hall defines affordable as $1,200 for a one-bedroom apartment, and that's based on an area median income of $86,000. I don't know a single person in Kansas City who's making $86,000 or who can afford a $1,200 apartment. So people are sent into the cycles that Zani described, where they're paying extra in their rent and they're having to cut back on other bills like their medication or their groceries. Unlike something like gas, rent is not an expense in your monthly budget that you can simply choose to cut back on, right?
That is a very important point. This is what it makes it ransom. Oh, things have gone up. We all have to cut back. You notice the ruling class always talking about, they're talking about us, not them. We all have to cut back. Can you cut back on rent? There's certain fixed costs that you cannot cut back on. And rent happens to be the one that takes the bulk of your money. So the thing that takes the bulk of your money, you can't cut back on. So what are these people talking about when they say make cuts? You mean you want me to go unhoused? Jobs that have historically been done by women, immigrants, and or ethnic minorities typically pay less. That is absolutely a fact. And don't think that that is a coincidence.
Right. The
Racism, sexism pays, and it pays well and profits.
alternative is homelessness. And to your point, homelessness is being criminalized in states like mine, like Missouri, and all across the country. So people are trapped in a really violent cycle right now where they're either forced to overdraft and cut back on meals and turn off the lights and sacrifice their humanity, or they're forced to the streets where they're criminalized for their poverty.
I wanted to turn to two tenants. The safeguards to prevent evictions during the pandemic expire. Tenants across the country facing these rent increases of up to, 5-10%. In California, 10%. These are Los Angeles tenants. Juan Garcia is neighbor of over 17 years, Ulysses Del Bosque, describing the burden of rising rents.
Estoy preocupado.
Yes, I am worried because they wanted to raise the rent, but unfortunately, I told them no, I did not accept that they raised it, but the other tenants did. They raised it by 10% and the tenants give them the rent.
There are going to be more problems because of the evictions that are increasing as a result of rents starting to rise. And there's too much inflation. Then it is impossible to be able to live quietly with everything, that all the situations that are happening.
Tara Ragavir, talk about the demographics of who's being priced out of their.
So this is where she kind of talks about how Black women, Black and brown people, poor, and the working class, those like 3 or 4 or 5 categories I mentioned there, those are the people that's being priced out. Those are the people that the eviction rates are hitting the most. This is a class war. But they're making it seem, oh, it's just inflation, rate hike. We got to get the economy balanced. We're balancing, so we're paying twice. And I'm getting ahead of myself. The video is going to explain this, not this video, but the next one. But we're essentially paying twice. We're paying in the beginning and we're paying at the end with these price hikes. And then we all have to cut back. Why is none of this stuff ever tied to capitalism? This was also something Nick mentioned. I think Bree made the point in the video on Rising with Nick, and it's like all the ills of a socialist system or a country that's socialist is blamed on communism or socialism. Anything, the lights are off, socialism, this and that, the socialism, immigrant crisis, socialism. Why is that none of that all never applied to capitalism? Why is homelessness not blamed on capitalism? Why isn't racism not blamed on capitalism? Why isn't gun violence not blamed on capitalism? Why is mental health not blamed on capitalism? Why is that? If the capitalists are the ones telling the story, that is the reason why we don't hear that.
Their rentals.
Disproportionately, the people who are impacted by rent hikes and by the type of rent gouging that we see corporate actors employing in the rental market are Black and brown tenants, are poor and working class tenants. Black women are the people who are the most at risk of eviction during, quote, normal times. And these are accelerated conditions that are also having that disproportionate effect on those same communities. There's recent research that tells us that institutional investors, private equity funds, real estate speculators target communities where there's actually higher percentage of Black and brown neighborhoods and people who are renting their homes. And then they raise the rent, right? They raise the rent to levels that the people there can't afford and force them into this kind of eviction cycle.
Can you talk about the Federal Housing Finance Agency, how it can help in fighting against rising rents? That's who you're meeting with in Washington.
We had a very promising meeting with the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency yesterday, Director Sandra Thompson, and we talked to her about the ways that FHFA, in its role as a regulator of Fannie and Freddie.
So this is where she's talking about some of the things that the president and some of the things that can be done to help this situation, the housing crisis. So that's where she's diving in. This is important information also.
Can actually have a massive impact on regulating the rents and protecting tenants. So as a regulator of Fannie and Freddie, FHFA has a role to play to actually add conditions to any federal financing. I'll give you an example. There's a corporate landlord called Starwood, where the CEO on a recent earnings call called inflation the gift that keeps on giving. And they've raked in record profits during the pandemic while they've been hiking rents across the country. Starwood has federally backed mortgages, right? So that's something within FHFA's purview. They could add conditions to the federal financing that many of these institutional investors rely on in order to rein in their rents. We could regulate rent increases, regulate lease renewals. That's all within Sandra Thompson's purview as the director of the FHFA.
And Congress, President Biden, what can they do?
So Congress is set to pass the Inflation Reduction Act. It doesn't have anything to do with reducing the rent. In our view, the president and his team have been thinking about gas and many other elements in inflation, and they've really been neglecting rent. This is the elephant in the room. Rent is the largest expense for most American households, and it's a core driver of inflation. So even as the Inflation Reduction Act passes, for it not to include rent is a major red flag. We're calling on
a major red flag where donors, that money that those donors gave, start to come into play.
President to do everything.
That's a major driver of inflation. How you call it that and don't even address that in any way.
His executive authority to direct agency level action, of course, to direct congressional action, and to use the power of the pulpit to call this crisis what it is, which is a national emergency, and to call out those actors in the private market that are actually rent gouging, using inflation as an excuse, but raising rents beyond the rate of inflation.
Tara Raghavir,
because and it's easy to see that you're raising it beyond inflation, because if your profits are up, that's an indication that you are charging more than it takes to cover inflation. Very easy to see.
I want to thank you for being with us, Director of KC Tenants, grassroots tenant-led organization in Kansas City, also the Homes Guarantee Campaign Director at People's Action.
So that's the end of that video. A lot of great information. Black, brown people, poor people, working class, of course, like with everything, are feeling the brunt of this recession, feeling the brunt of these Fed hikes, feeling the brunt of all this economic downturn. We are always the ones have to pay for it. We always have. We have to pull up. We have to tighten our belts. So now let me go to an article, and this is a very important article. because it talks about it from a class perspective, the housing crisis. Let me post it right here. I can post it in the same. It's from the World Socialist website. It was written, I think, 10 days ago. Surging cost of living in U.S. drives class tension to the breaking point. Before I get to the article, a couple of things. As I always say, like this video, and let's see where we're at now with likes. Oh, wow, we're doing pretty good with likes already. So 155 is what we're at. We can push that to about 180. Can we push that to 180? That's about 25 more. So 25 more likes to get a couple more people in the chat. Also, if you want to join our Substack, you get notifications of all of our streams. So like this stream was not a scheduled stream. I sent out notifications. So if you're on there, you get a notification. All you have to do is go to there and put in your website and name. I mean, your email address and name. Before I started the stream, we're at 22,538 subscribers. If you're new, subscribe today. If you think you've subscribed, make sure you double check. And also, it's tied to this topic today. One of our comrades, RBN member, JB Font, as he's known, is being affected by this housing crisis, by this class war. We all are, but he's being directly affected by this component of the class war, which is this housing crisis. And JB has been homeless before. He tells the story. But we're raising funds for JB, who lives in Florida. Florida happens to be, I think, is in the top 3 states, and maybe Orlando specifically, where he's at, where the rent has gone up the most. So the surging cost of living has hit JB, our comrade, and we're raising $5,000 for him. Last time I checked, a couple of days ago, we were at 2,000. We may be over that, but we're at 2,000. So if you're able to contribute, that's where you can send the dough. Venmo, Forever Mutual Aid, or Mutual Aid Forever, and Cash App, Mutual Aid Forever. All right, so back to the story. Now, let's read this article here. Where is it at? I have it in 2 places, right here. All right, this is a really good article. So this is by Jerry White, the author. The latest inflation data published Tuesday shows that the working class confronts months of immense, let me highlight this, months of immense hardship as wages lose their value in the face of rising living cost. That's what the working class is faced with. That's what the working class and poor is faced with. I want to keep making sure I'm including the poor. So months of immense hardship as wages lose their value in the face of rising cost. The ruling class attempt to make the working class pay for the crisis of capitalism is driving workers into struggle across the world, including in the United States, where teachers, nurses, and possibly railroad workers are launching powerful strikes. This is a crisis of capitalism, and it's driving people like our comrade JB to struggle, like all of us. We're all being hit by these rising housing costs. Maybe unless you own your home, but maybe your taxes gone up. I don't know, but those that are renting, we all are being hit by it. Price increases in virtually all consumer items led to a 12-month inflation rate of 8.3%. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported Tuesday, Rent, groceries, and medical care costs drove the rise in the consumer price index, CPI, in August. And let me continue. Household furnishings, new vehicle, motor vehicle insurance, and education also saw increases. Like, how is this sustainable that everything to live is going up, but not the money you're getting from employers? How is this sustainable? Like, like Nick said in the clip, like, what does capitalism, what does the United States, who do we have to blame for this other than capitalism? Who do we have to blame? There's no sanctions being placed on us like we're placing on other countries. So let's look at some of the numbers here in this article. Rental housing costs rose another 0.7% in August, bringing the 12-month increase to 6.2%. The highest since 1986. Utilities were up 2.1% in August and are up a staggering 19.8% over the past year. Do we not see how they're extracting wealth from the working class? The cost of food up 0.8% last month and has risen by 11.4% over the last year, the sharpest since 1979. Look at these prices. Now 5% increase in wages. Really? What does that do? When rent has gone up 6.2%. When utilities have gone up 19.8%. When food costs have gone up 11%. You notice how all those numbers are more than 5% wage increase? This is a class war. And it's very important that the working class, the proletariat, view it in that way. They are extracting wealth, continuing to widen the inequality gap. Oh, did I read that last sentence? My bad. Okay. President Biden did not refer to the new figures during a White House event to celebrate the passage of the phony Inflation Reduction Act Tuesday afternoon, only saying glibly, "We have more to do." The president touted the 3-month fall in gasoline prices without mentioning that gas is still up 26% over the last year. You like how they do that? They jack the prices up $20. The prices go down $5 and say, look, economy's doing great. It went down $5, not saying that it went up $15 to $20 to start with. It's a class war. Biden, the Democrats, and Republicans have provided at least together. Think about that. Relief to them immediately. Where's the people's whose money they're spending? Where's our relief for this inflation? Why aren't checks being immediately sent to the American people to help with these inflation costs? Biden, the Democrats, and Republicans have provided at least $50 billion to arm Ukraine this year, but they have done nothing to alleviate the impact of rising costs on the working class and middle class families. These are problems that are easily fixed by our government, and they choose not to. We don't have the money. Really? Where did the $50 billion come from? Where is this place where every time we ask for something, there's no money, but they can find money. Where is this secret hiding place where all this money's at that they find for war? Where is this at? Cutting back on education. How many people have kids, school-age kids, where your school don't even have a full-time nurse? Your kid can only get hurt when the nurse is there. This is serious. You don't think that's a class war? Where your child can go to school, get hurt, and not have somebody medically trained, a nurse, on site. And you don't understand that this is a class war. Do you think that's happening to their kids? Do you think the private schools that they send their kids to, do you think they have a nurse every day? What do you think? Let's read some more. In a separate report Tuesday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics said real average hourly earnings fell another 0.2% from July to August over the last year. Real average hourly pay of an American worker fell by 2.8%. So this is a phrase. Where's it at? Real average hourly earnings. So regardless of the number going up, what does that buy? What's the real earnings? What's the earning, not the number, because the number can be $15, but if burgers, if your local burger stand, your burgers are $15, what does that do? That means you're working an hour for that. Hang on a second here. Oh. Screen is it jiggling for everybody? Oh, it was shaking it a little bit. All right, it stopped. Where did I? Okay, so over the last year. Okay, I read that. So the point from this last paragraph here. Oh, this is talking about real hourly. Now I remember where I was at. So real average hourly earnings. What your earnings can actually get you. Let's read this quote from a Detroit Chrysler worker. Everything is going up except our paychecks. That's what I just said. And he happens to be named James. See, James is think alike. I do this as the "we gonna be all right." That's that whole thing. Yeah, they came up with. James, a Detroit Chrysler worker, told the World Socialist website, "I'm working 2 jobs. Remember I mentioned that? You have to come and pick up 2 jobs to live. I'm working 2 jobs and at least 80 hours a week to make it. It's crazy. I don't have time to sleep." This is exactly what capitalism wants us to be. In a perpetual state of this. I'm working multiple jobs and I barely have time to sleep. This is a class war, everyone. The rise in living expenses, which has added $460 to a typical family monthly cost, is escalating class conflict in the United States and internationally. This week alone, 1,500 nurses in Minnesota participated in one of the largest private sector healthcare strikes in U.S. history. 6,000 Seattle teachers walked out of the classroom, and more than 100,000 railroad workers are set to strike at 12:01 a.m. Eastern time on Friday morning. Now, this is 10 days old, so we already know the shenanigans that went on with them pretending like there was a tentative deal and there wasn't actually a tentative deal between the rail workers, all to avoid a strike. And it came out that there actually is no tentative deal because everybody's like, yeah, now the tentative deal has been struck. Great news, strike averted, supply chain saved. Now the workers just have to vote on it, and then it start to come out. Well, where are the details so the workers can vote? There is no details because there is no plan. There never was one. So let me read this again. The rise in living expenses, which has added $460 to a typical family's monthly cost, is escalating class conflict in the United States and internationally. This week alone, 15,000 nurses in Minnesota participated in one of the largest private sector health care strikes in U.S. history. 6,000 Seattle teachers walked out of classrooms, and more than 100,000 rail workers are set to strike. The American ruling class and the Biden administration in particular is relying on the trade unions apparatus to enforce contracts with wage increases that are far below the rate of inflation. Indeed, workers and trade unions have seen nominal wage increases that are significantly lower than for workers who are not in unions. In an effort to enforce labor peace at home while it wages war abroad, the Biden administration is working on further integrating trade union apparatus and its thousands of officials making six-figure salaries into a tripartite corporatist relationship. I got a second here. Directed against the working class. Where's my phone? Let me read this last paragraph here, and then we're going to go to the next video. The teachers' unions are doing whatever they can to suppress the fight of educators against horrific conditions and the spread of the pandemic as schools open. The healthcare unions are isolating the powerful struggle of Minnesota nurses while limiting the strike to only 3 days. I'm going to look up this word. Maybe it's a word I know and see what this is.
Tripartite.
Oh, tripartite. Consisting of 3 parts. Tripartite. So, into a tripartite corporatist relationship, into a 3-part corporatist relationship, into a 3-way corporatist relationship. So that's what that is. All right. Needed to make sure I understood that. The AFL-CIO apparatus is desperately trying to keep a lid on anger that is boiling to the surface. There's the people in the working class and poor, they're getting more and more restless with the bullshit of capitalism. They are getting more and more restless, which is a good thing. I wish more and more people, the rank and file, we did a report or a segment on the rail workers. More and more opposition is growing with this so-called the framing, the outline of this tentative deal, because there's no details. Largely not even addressing their main concern, their scheduling concern. So let's now start to dive into how capitalism has sort of distorted our understanding of housing. And this video also talks about zeroing in on the uselessness and the parasitic nature of landlords. So let's watch.
First things first, this video isn't about landlords as individuals. Landlords can be awful and landlords can be chill. There's truly every flavor of landlord out there. Not that I'm suggesting we should eat them, of course. No, this video is about landlords as a class, and the power that that class has. It's not a video about how individual landlords choose to use or not use that power, that's up to them, though most landlords absolutely abuse their privileged status. No, this video is a criticism of that power itself, how it underlies the landlord-tenant relationship, and the many awful consequences of landlords existing that we might want to reconsider. I'm not talking about individual people you might know that happen to be landlords, especially not any older relatives who rent out an extra property to supplement their retirement, for example. This video is about the existence of landlords in general. So, what's the problem with landlords? Generally speaking, landlording is a form of rent-seeking behavior. That's pretty obvious given the fact that the thing we give landlords is literally called rent. But let's actually go over what rent-seeking means for a second. Landlords, like all rent seekers, make money based not on any work they do, or in exchange for producing anything of value, but on the simple fact that they own something necessary. In this case, housing. They do not add anything to society, but they do accumulate wealth. Normally,
just the understanding. Now, this kind of goes into the private ownership. This is the problem with it. Private ownership of a necessity. This is why oil, this is why the natural resources should be nationalized. This is why capitalists fight tooth and nail, even trying to overthrow countries that are nationalizing natural resources, because then it can be privatized and money extracted from it by private owners, by the capitalist class, the international capitalist class.
Accumulating wealth is something that's only supposed to happen when you produce wealth, something that happens when people work. Taking thing A and, through varying processes, turning it into thing B, which is worth more, for example. That's what creates value in a society, and landlords just don't do that. While some landlords do a minimal amount of work, the big appeal of becoming a landlord is obviously the fact that it's quote-unquote passive income, meaning that it doesn't require any work from the landlord themselves. That's because at the end of the day, landlords are just the people who own the deed and nothing more. What the law considers livable requires very little effort to maintain once the developers, architects, and construction workers have already taken care of it. So either landlords will do very minimal labor or hire a property manager. In other words, a landlord doesn't actively produce anything for society, or at least they don't need to. You, in contrast, most likely do. In your role as a worker, you probably transform some raw material into something else, or you provide a service to someone, or you create something for others to use or enjoy, or you're currently pursuing some kind of education or training and will do one of those things soon. The important thing is that without you, there would be no economy to speak of. Natural resources would stay in the ground, food wouldn't be food, people wouldn't get the services they need, and so on. Most likely, your boss pays you money for the work you do because it's produced something of value for at least one person, if not society writ large. But the same can't be said for landlords.
It's a commercial. I don't even want it to appear, so.
Like that wick.
Landlords don't produce anything. They don't design the buildings they own, that's architects. They don't plan or even finance their construction, that's developers and governments. They don't actually build the houses, that's construction workers. They don't handle the wiring, that's electricians. They don't fix your sink, that's the super or a handy worker of some sort. Landlords literally just own the house, that's it. Legally, that's all it takes for them to collect rent. Anything else they choose to do is extra credit. But landlords will tell you the opposite. To try to justify themselves and their parasitic role, landlords will often say something like, well, landlords provide housing. The idea being that this is some kind of service landlords are doing, and if we didn't have landlords, where would people get their homes? Where would they live? Where would they sleep? Where would they plug in their PS5s? Some other outlet? Don't be ridiculous. And this is an almost coherent argument, assuming you flat out ignore that the housing is there already. Other people did the work. It's done. In reality, landlords provide housing the same way scalpers...
Right, like landlords don't provide housing. The housing is already built. The people who provided the housing are the electricians, the construction workers. That's who provided the housing, not landowners, landlords. Just the name, the history in that name. But let's continue. That's sidetracked.
Scalpers provide tickets. They don't. Somebody already printed out the tickets, scheduled the show, booked the artists, hired the technicians, rented out the venue, and put the tickets on sale. Landlords are nothing more than a useless middleman, controlling more of the supply than they can use themselves, exactly like a scalper, in order to resell it and skim money off the top. A lot of money. On average, landlords in the US make $97K a year. In other words, more than double the average renter's income. That means that if you rent, your landlord, on average, makes twice as much as you and does literally nothing. This is particularly appalling given that there is no state, metropolitan area, or county in the US where a worker earning the federal or prevailing state or local minimum wage can afford a modest 2-bedroom rental. And in only 9% of all US counties can a full-time minimum wage worker afford a 1-bedroom rental. The amount landlords demand for rent to keep for themselves as they passively earn income is literally so high that even a person working a full-time job can't afford it. At best, landlords might claim that their added value to society is that they are facilitating the transmission of housing from the person who built it to the person who will eventually live in it. But even that isn't true. Not only is that almost labor, and that defeats the whole purpose of passive income, landlords make the process worse. If the landlord could buy the house in the first place, it's because it was already on sale somewhere, meaning that anyone could buy it themselves. Therefore, landlords interrupt the process of housing going from producer to user. They take a one-step process and complicate it. As part of this intrusion, they actively slow the process down and make it more expensive by outcompeting legitimate consumers, all thanks to their privileged financial means. Because landlords are privileged. And to see that, look no further than another thing landlords say. Oftentimes, you'll hear landlords tell people that if they don't like the landlord-tenant relationship, they can just leave, or buy their own home if that's what they prefer. It's so simple. Just buy your own home if you're so upset. But it's obvious that's a BS argument, right? Buying a home is absurdly expensive, and landlords know this. While you can take out a mortgage to finance buying your home, you will still need to pay a down payment if you want to own a house. And that will need to come from your savings. You can't take a loan out for a down payment pretty much anywhere. That means only someone with enough in their savings can even consider homeownership as an option, meaning
only someone who has enough money in their savings can even consider home ownership as an option. I forget the amount of people, millions of people in the United States that can't even afford a $400 emergency. So people who can't afford millions of Americans who can't afford a $400 emergency, where are they going to get money to put down on a home? You can't get a loan for a down payment. So that means you have to have money already in your bank account. How many millions of people are priced out of that? So homes are being sold. I mean, we have corporations buying up homes. And they're going to talk about that in this video, how corporations and how it's worse when corporations are worse landlords than regular scummy landlords. So let's listen some further to this video.
Meaning we've already filtered out millions of people from the just go buy your own house argument. Then there's the fact that a mortgage isn't even guaranteed. Banks will frequently deny people a $500 a month mortgage if they think they're too risky, blaming a low credit score. But of course, see no problem letting that same person continue paying $1,000 a month in rent. Most landlords know this too, and will take advantage of their good relationship with the bank thanks to their privileged financial status, to once again act as a middleman. Most of the time you're renting somewhere, your landlord is simply passing the cost of a mortgage off to you, the renter. They'll pay the down payment because they have enough savings and you don't, quickly make it back within a few months of renting the property out, and then cover the cost of a mortgage every month using your rent check. At the end of the day, you might have paid the full cost of the down payment and even the entirety of the mortgage, but they will own the house. You will leave with nothing and they will be left with an asset, effectively for free. And this might make it seem like, since you're essentially able to afford it, you could theoretically save enough for a down payment and just own the house yourself. But of course, that's an almost impossibly difficult thing to do when 30...
Think about the point he just made. let's say a person rents a home, it's a nice home, and they rent it for a long time. They rent it for the entirety of the mortgage of the landlord. So essentially, the person had the money to pay over time the entire mortgage to buy the house directly, but didn't have the funds to put down the damn payment. That's capitalism.
30+% of your paycheck already goes towards paying for housing every month because you're forced to be a renter. Only those born into wealth can skip the renting phase and go straight to the homeownership phase, since everyone else needs to rent while they work and save up enough for the down payment. So really, the go buy your own house argument also doesn't apply to most people under 30. Then, on top of all this, there's the landlords who don't use this clever passing the buck trick with their mortgages, and whose rent checks are pure profit.
Right.
Just as an example, 45% of landlords in the UK have no outstanding mortgages whatsoever. Every cent you send their way goes directly in their pockets. They have the asset, and simply because of that fact and nothing more, they collect the money. So if you can't afford to buy your own home, after all, millennials have 35% less wealth than previous generations at the same age, a singularly high mountain of student loan debt, suffer from the fact that housing prices have been on an upward trajectory their entire adult lives, and around 70% say that they are waiting to buy a home because they simply can't afford it. What are you supposed to do? Well, if you don't like renting because it's exploitative and rent-seeking, and you can't afford your own place because staggeringly few people can, the only option left is homelessness. And homelessness, apart from being one of the most brutal, crushing situations a human being can experience, also happens to be pretty much illegal all over the country. Everywhere in the United States, cities around...
So how does that? They price people out of having affordable homes. Our homeless population is increasing. Then they're making being homeless illegal. So what happens to those people? Do they go to jail and become more just slaves? What is the goal of these policies and what they're producing?
Erect anti-homeless architecture to drive the homeless out and make their mere existence miserable. It's illegal in many places to pitch a tent or even just sleep. And cops will happily enforce these laws, or enforce the anti-homeless law they imagine must exist even when it doesn't. Cops frequently destroy homeless camps, beat the homeless, or otherwise make their existence hell. And once again, landlords know this is the alternative. And they know that if you complain, they can always call the sheriff and have you evicted, violently pushing you out of your home and closer to the terrifying possibility of becoming homeless.
In this family, we don't kill sheep, we kill wolves.
That guy's back again. Anyway, sometimes I look like Kevin Costner in there. Anyway.
Landlords are not shy when it comes to using this pressure. Officially, 3.6 million eviction notices are filed each year. And that's just the official evictions, not including all the evictions millions of people are forced into when landlords suddenly jack up rents and you're forced to look elsewhere. The result is that in any given year, 3.5 million people, 1.4 million of them children, experience homelessness. What all this means is that every lease you've ever had has been signed under duress. While you technically have the freedom to choose what landlord you sign a lease with, most people do not have the freedom to not sign a lease at all. The only other reasonable option, homeownership, is unaffordable, and it's either that or you're on your own, with your most basic human need going unmet. That means renting isn't just a normal transaction, it's ransom.
That's what it is. You're overpaying for something that really you shouldn't even be paying for, in my opinion. Housing should be a right. I mean, housing costs is just ridiculous. Landlords should be abolished. But there's a whole lot in there, private property, all that. So that's a whole nother discussion. Let's continue here.
Everyone knows that housing is a good investment. It's the #1 piece of financial advice that's consistent from year to year, and housing is probably the best thing you can put your money in if you have it. The reason that's true is that the demand for housing is inelastic at the individual level. We all need to be housed. It is a non-negotiable condition of living. That means that those who control the supply, landlords, can create artificial scarcity to jack up the prices. Since when push comes to shove, you will pay however much you can afford on meeting your most fundamental needs. Same with food, same with healthcare. With the
ransom, complete ransom. A lot of these tactics, it's literally, oh, like you have a choice, the illusion of choice with housing. What choice do I have? The only other choice is to be homeless.
The added fact that the price has no relationship whatsoever to the value added to society. So far, all these have been generic problems with landlords. But then there are all of the specific consequences of this system. For starters, in the US, a lot of the housing supply is not held by individuals, but by investment firms. Further proof that it's not work that makes landlords money, by the way, it's literally just the ownership of assets. Hundreds of thousands of Americans, whether they know it or not, are renting from Wall Street. For-profit firms, as opposed to individual investors, control around 45% of the housing supply, or 21.7 million individual units according to Pew. As a for-profit venture, housing owned in this arrangement usually comes with even worse conditions than a quote-unquote normal landlord-tenant relationship. Renting from Wall Street comes with aggressive rent hikes, fee gouging, and high rates of eviction. This is because investors have found that, although tenant turnover costs companies an average of $1,500, they can easily recover that cost through late fees, court fines, or retaining tenant security deposits. And since shareholders demand that profits consistently outpace inflation, that cost gets passed on to renters. In other words, you. This means for-profit firms will make sure to make a profit by any means necessary, regardless of how many evictions it takes. These companies will use every violent tool available to make a profit, and we have no choice but to agree to these awful terms because we can't not have housing. The perpetrators of these acts are companies like Blackstone, the world's largest real estate management firm, which should obviously not be confused with BlackRock, the mega firm that also invests a ton into housing, $120 billion by their own admission, and which has multiple former high-level employees in the Biden admin. Nor should it be confused with Blackwater, the private security company hired by the US government that guarded the homes of the wealthy during Hurricane Katrina and was given the license to shoot people simply trying to flee one of the greatest disasters in American history. 3 very different, totally normal companies that should absolutely not be mixed up. But back to landlording. Large, for-profit housing firms use their powerful financial position to do all sorts of cruel things, like the stuff we've already covered, but also like stopping rent control laws that would prevent them from hiking up rents willy-nilly. In practical terms, that means using the profits made from tenants to screw tenants over even more in the future. Then there's the fact that the two sides of Wall Street are mutually beneficial. While one side exploits the nature of the market to make profits, eventually crashing the economy like what's happened every 5 or 10 years for the last half-century, the other side buys up the houses that get foreclosed on. We saw this in 2008. The economy crashed due to Wall Street chasing.
I mean, it is truly a vicious cycle. Crash the economy, millions of people lose their home, and then these Romney types, because this is what Romney used to do, come in and buy all these distressed properties for a low cost. So they just made a profit, great, but look how many families' lives are destroyed. How come capitalism is never blamed for that? The housing crisis. Nothing is ever blamed on capitalism, but everything is blamed communism. That's just ringing in my head. Again, thank you for pushing us to 200 likes. Thank you for that. Thank you for pushing us there. If we could get to 225, 25 more likes, so like this video, subscribe to our Substack. And I'm going to read this last part, getting back to the article now. I'm going to read this last part from the article before we kind of sum up this segment here. Right here. So I'm going to read a couple more parts here because this is a class war. So I wanted to kind of, in the first video, illustrate sort of like the real world effects and some of the activists on the ground trying to assist this housing crisis. And it also talks about this being a class struggle in the first video. Then, of course, the article directly targets this as being a class struggle, and the tensions between classes are being shown. And some of the illustrations they're talking about, and some of the strikes that you see, we're seeing a resurgence of strikes. So now let's get back to the article, and then again, that last video was just to kind of tie the uselessness of landlords, the sort of uselessness of this whole profiteering, not uselessness, but the whole profiteering of the housing market to the extent to where people are being driven out of their homes. So let's continue here with the article. The teachers' unions are, let me make sure I'm sharing this. Yeah. The teachers' unions are doing whatever they can to suppress the fight of educators against horrific conditions and the spread of the pandemic in schools. The healthcare unions, I think I read, but I'll read it again. The healthcare unions are isolating the powerful struggle of Minnesota nurses while limiting their strike to only 3 days. The AFL-CIO apparatus is desperately trying to keep a lid on the anger that is boiling to the surface. Nowhere is it clearer than in the rail industry, where workers have not had a raise in years and have no sick pay, no sick days. Many are forced to remain on call 24/7, leaving no time for their families or rest. While the Biden administration and the millionaires in the U.S. Congress are threatening to use strike-breaking legislation, meaning they're going to break the rail strike because they could just vote on this piece of legislation that forces them back to work at the terms that the rail company wants. Again, this is clearly, I've never seen the class war so vividly and widespread than I've seen in the last 3 or 4 years. And it just keeps intensifying. So, they promoted the fiction that let me start over. I'm going to start here. So while the Biden administration and the millionaires in the U.S. Congress are threatening to use strike-breaking legislation against workers, the unions are engaged in a divide and conquer strategy aimed at forcing through a sellout agreement. So you have the union leadership working with Congress to break the strike or to break these workers, working in conjunction. So they promoted the fiction that a presidential emergency board would propose a contract favorable to workers, the very same proposal that Congress is preparing to try to ram through over the overwhelming opposition. The ruling class is engaged in a policy of class war. This is also important when you get into with the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, with the full backing of the Biden administration, has made it clear that he is willing to throw the economy into a recession with sharp increases in rate hikes, which are designed to exert pain and use mass unemployment to beat back worker demands for raises that keep up with the rate of inflation. Inflation, however, is not caused by workers' demands for raises to keep up with rising costs, but the infusion of trillions of dollars by the U.S. government and central banks to bail out Wall Street and prop up the stock market bubble. The economic crisis, and we see what's happening with the stock market. It's crashing. I think it crashed again either today or yesterday. I was reading, can't remember. The economic crisis has been exacerbated by the limitless resources handed over to the Pentagon to wage war against Russia and China. And we were just talking about that. The 80 million or 50 million at the time of this article is more now. At the time of this article was written, it was sent. I think it was more has been sent since then. Urgent action by the working class is needed to defend living standards. Let me say that again. Urgent action by the working class is needed to defend living standards. The Socialist Equality Party calls for workers to form independent organizations of working class struggle, ranking file committees in every workplace and neighborhood. So it's kind of giving like a little bit of suggestions here. I do want to cover them because you want to say, what can we do? So I do want to cover them, but let me put up some of your comments if your comments is on topic, because I know some of you are having an unrelated debate here. Inflation is good for debtors. Great to see Wall Street crashing. The split between NATO and BRICS is one crack in the existing order. More will follow. Capitalism will die probably in our lifetimes. Wow, to see that, I would love to see that. I would love to see it. I don't know if we are, but I would love to see it. So let's get into some things that we can do and wrap this up here. So a network of rank and file committees as part of the International Workers Alliance of rank and file committees should prepare strikes, mass demonstrations, and other class actions to win the following emergency demands. And this is some of the following demands. Raise base hourly pay by 40% to offset declining real income over the last 5 years. 2/3 of American workers are living paycheck to paycheck. Immediately index all wages to the current inflation level and introduce an automatic monthly cost of inflation adjustment, COLA, escalator to keep pace with rising expenses. So it's saying to add immediately index all wages to the current inflation level and introduce an automatic monthly cost of living adjustment. So it changes. So if you're making so let's do it. So you make $10 an hour or 40. Let's start with the first one. Raise base hourly pay by 40%, making, so now you're making $14 an hour, and then have that immediately indexed to current inflation levels and introduce automatic. So it would just automatically go up per month. So if the month it goes up, if inflation goes up to 3%, then that month it will also kick in that your wages will go up 3% to match that cost of living, which a lot of people, not just on the left, say there's a good idea to have wages tied to inflation. Increase all employer paid medical and pension benefits in line with inflation. Sharply raise government funded Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security benefits to protect retired workers and spouses. Immediately relief for unpaid credit card, student loan, car, and housing debt. stop price gouging by the energy monopolies and roll prices back to the November 2020 levels of $2 a gallon. The profits must be reclaimed to meet social needs. So those profits that the oil industry made reclaimed, and the energy industry must nationalize under public ownership and democratic control. Those are all some great demands that they're saying that should be some of the demands that's required. And I'm going to end there as far as this article. A great article. You can go there because it's a lot. It's it's still not unfinished, so you can go there to the socialist World Socialist website and get and read the rest or the remainder of that article if you like. And where is that? Okay, I am going to bring up something here. Because we had some people who wanted to have conversation about continue this conversation about MAGA communism, I'm going to have the closeout video be this Michael Parenti video. So I'm just setting that up. So I'm just giving you the reason why that video is being set up. So this is a class war. The housing crisis and the Fed rate hike, I mean, several things, the government, this is all class warfare designed to extract more wealth, designed to bring pain to us, all for their short-term profits, all for the sake of capitalism. We're all going through these pains, all living like this because of capitalism. So, let me do a couple of things here. The first thing, because I'm going to get out of here, gotta go pick up my daughter. The first thing is let's update the number. So this was the number before we started, and we gained a couple of subscribers. I think that's, if I did the math in my head, that's what, 21. Oops, 1 second. 60 now. That just went up again. Okay. All right, so we are now 22,560 subscribers. Join today. We do a lot of streaming every single day, just about every single day. Maybe 5 to 6 times a week we stream. Sometimes Saturday we don't have anything on Saturdays, I think. So join, subscribe to us if you like the content. If you want to hear critiques, foreign policy critiques from a left perspective, critiquing the American empire. If you want to hear about the police state, if you want to hear about things like Israel, if you want to hear about if you're not on the blue team or the red team, you're just saying both teams are terrible, you found a home here with Revolutionary Blackout. So subscribe if you like the content. If you want to be notified of streams, subscribe to our Substack, listed right there on the screen. Just go to the website, enter your email and name, and you're on our mailing list to get notifications for that. Also, like this video. Let's see where we're at with likes. Oh wow, we're at 238. Let's see if we can get to 250. So let that be our ending mark. Let's see if we can push to 250. That's about 12 more likes. I'll throw your comments up on the screen. I just want to make sure I'm covering everything. Got to always do these items here. The Activist Summit is October 22nd to 23rd. If you are an activist, email us. In the subject line, put Activist Summit. Any and all types of activists we're looking for. We're still doing the JB fundraiser, $5,000 to help them with housing. And here is where you can send it. Venmo or Cash App, and Venmo and Cash App. There you go. All right, and I think there might be one other thing I'm leaving you with here, or maybe not. Maybe not. So I think we're gonna leave it here. I'm not gonna be on for over the weekend, so I want to say wish everybody a great weekend, a great rest of your day. I gotta go deal with this car being towed and picking up my daughter, so I'm gonna go deal with that. Thank you for joining us. I'm gonna leave you with this video where he's talking about MAGA communism being akin or being similar or having some of the same characteristics of a fake revolution, or what Michael Parenti calls a fake revolution. And that's what this video covers. So here, yeah. Oh, where am I? Not here. Oh, I lost myself. Here we go.
In point of fact, these bozos are really just staging what Michael Parenti refers to as a false revolution.
Both the Italian fascists and the Nazis made a conscious effort at imitating the left. Youth organizations, mass mobilizations, rallies, parades, banners, symbols, slogans, uniforms. Fascism, in fact, is a false revolution. It makes a revolutionary appeal without making an actual revolution. It propagates the widely proclaimed new order while serving the same old moneyed interests.
In Black Shirts and Reds, Parenti points out that fascists have always co-opted popular leftist messaging and aesthetics to present themselves as heroes of the people, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. MAGA communism and American patriot socialism are just feeble attempts to hide a brown shirt beneath a red cape, following in the footsteps of the great monsters of history.
Now, like with a lot of terms like liberalism, democracy, socialism, communism, no single definition of fascism maybe will satisfy everybody. And with fascism, there's a really special problem because it's a beguiling mix of revolutionary-sounding mass appeals and reactionary class politics. And the reactionary class politics are the part of fascism that our establishment historians almost never talk about. Hitler's party, for instance, was called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, or Nazis. It's a very left-sounding name, National Socialist German Workers, and it was designed to win broad support among working people, even while the Nazis were destroying working-class organizations. In other words, fascism, the original Italian and German variations of fascism, was a political phenomenon that made a revolutionary appeal without making a revolution. It promised to solve the ills of the many while in fact protecting the special interests of the few with violence and terror. And it propagated a new political consciousness, a new order, a new nation to serve the same old capitalist system.